the Duval Special Committee of the Whole workshop for July 29th, 2025 to order at 5:31 p.m. Relatively short agenda this evening. What we'll be doing with the order. Are there any items for the order tonight? If not, I don't know if Brian, if you're ready to go, but our one discussion item of the evening is a working session on potential ballot initiatives with Christian Sinderman, lead strategist, Aaron Schultz, consultant of Northwest, I don't know what the P is, NWP Consulting. And then it looks like Ryan Haskin is online. I'll turn that over to you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. Will you just give us a couple of minutes for Christian and Aaron to join?
Sure thing.
Hey, Christian.
Christian, we were going to give one more minute for Aaron to join since she wasn't online yet.
Christian, can you hear us?
I can, yes. Yes.
Okay.
And we can go ahead
Previously, so that's better audio.
and we could go ahead and get started. I know Erin was driving, so she might be a little delayed, but we're happy to get rolling and she can add color commentary.
We have a deck. Am I able to share my screen?
You should be able to, yes.
Okay, great. Or if you guys have, we can, whoever works best. But go ahead, Ryan, if it's
You can go for it if you'd like.
Okay, is that
all right.
okay? I think that's hopefully coming up.
Well, do you want to should we start with introductions of everybody, or what would be how are you normally like to stage your meetings and these types of presentations? Just give us some guidance of how you want to get started and we can get rolling.
Cynthia, I don't know if you want to sort of make an intro and then we can introduce ourselves, but just in terms of the topic and the agenda.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So we have with us NWP Consulting to talk about just planning, decision-making, potential items for you all to consider when thinking about any potential ballot measure. This is not to supplant the council deliberative process. You all have decisions ahead of you, but this is an effort to just set the stage and help you have some tools to think about the kinds of decisions you have to make, how to run a ballot measure. And so Christian and Ryan are here to walk you through some of that stage setting tonight. And then, you know, as we continue this work, we'll keep kind of adding one more tool to the mix. And as you all consider, if you would like to vote, doing a ballot measure and how you all want to go through the deliberative process, I'll be here to support you through that effort.
And just so that you're aware, sort of Christian in the audience today, Ron Mercer, I'm the Mayor Pro Tem. We have 3 of the council members. We're down 2 for this evening, and the mayor's not here, so it's a relatively small group. We may have some questions. We're also streaming the presentation this evening, but yeah, any advice? I think this is the first time many of us have gone through this process, so don't assume we know much of anything in terms of how to get started, and then I think there'll be an opportunity to ask questions once you complete your presentation.
Perfect.
Do you want to go around the room and
Sure, we can
introduce
start.
who we have in the room?
Councilmember Olin.
I think I'm on camera here. Hey, I'm Adam Olin, council member, position 1. Really just echoing what Ron said, this is my first time through this process, and so I'm eager to learn both best practices and just how to best navigate through these processes.
I'm Amy McHenry, with position 3, council member.
I'm Councilmember Naplin.
And then I'll hand it over to Councilmember Supple.
Oh, Councilmember Supple.
And I think we also have.
Yeah.
Laura Thomas, Community Development Department.
Ryan Keller, Chief of Police. Tim Botero, City Clerk.
Right. All right. Well, I'll kick off from our end. Christian Sinderman with NWP Consulting. Been really excited to engage with all of you and help you think through this process. It's both easier than it seems, but also can be kind of complex. And so as Cynthia noted, we're here to provide whatever answer questions, provide technical support, and help think through kind of the right way to stage these types of preliminary conversations and planning, and then of course if we decide to go forward and place something on the ballot. But it's great to be part of your team and to join you for this. Ryan, do you want to say a couple words?
Sure. Yeah, great to be here with you all. I'm Ryan, working with NWP since 2022 now, mostly King County based, and we're excited to, have this conversation. I'll hand it over to Erin.
Hi all, my name is Erin Schultz. I apologize for being off camera, but I have been with NWP for just over 15 years and have had the opportunity to work on ballot measures and issue campaigns at every level, and are currently working on a number, and so excited to explore that possibility with you all, hear about what the needs are, and talk through the sort of most strategic way that we can help set you up for success.
Thank you.
So I think, where we can begin is, Ryan, if you want to move the slides forward. So just a little bit about kind of the work we've done. We've worked on, at this point, over 40 successful local measures. There's a few, sadly, that are not, but we try to dwell on the positive. And as part of our learnings here, we can describe, kind of which ones have not been successful, which sometimes can be just as instructive, if not more so than winning things. But we've been doing this for quite a while, as Erin noted, and there's sort of a common set of themes, I think, to successful levies. Whether they're in like more larger and more progressive cities like Seattle or countywide, but the number of smaller cities we've worked in, Bothell, University Place, done some stuff in Vancouver, Spokane, more some smaller, more rural. There's different ways to sort of approach and package these types of measures. But it's a wonderful iterative process, and we have a lot of fun with them. And those results numbers in the table there, feel pretty good when you look at them. But the method behind the madness there is that you typically don't put something out to vote that you don't feel pretty confident about winning. And so what you want to do, and again, and not to put the cart before the horse, but is to, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're leaving it totally up to chance. If you move forward, you want to be fairly confident you're going to get support. In the case of University Place with their public safety levy, they actually were unsuccessful, fell a few votes short on the first round, and then came back and won on a second round. And we could talk a little about that because I know public safety is obviously on your discussion list here too. But so again, there's a number of different lessons learned, and there's a number of different ways to approach it. But the winning margin for these things is a great affirmation, but it's also part of the process, right? You don't want to go forward unless you think you've got a good chance of meeting with voter approval, and they like the value proposition of what you're proposing, because fundamentally you're asking them to give you more money in exchange for some services that they like, and that's obviously what you all do as your rules, but levies are specifically transactional in that way, and want to really respect the voters and respect kind of where they're coming from as well. And I don't know, Aaron or Ryan, if you want to add anything more in terms of any of the background on these.
No, I think that was great, and I know that in the preceding slides we can get into a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay, great. And please feel free to jump in with questions. Because of the camera and I have a hard time seeing hands or faces. So if there's anything, please jump in and ask.
Yeah, and I can dive in here. I know
Yeah.
that most jurisdictions don't go for levies just for the fun of it, even though that can be what more conservative taxpayers tend to think. And we understand that there are some really specific needs in your community. What's been shared with us is funding for a Cedar Crest High School resource officer and infrastructure needs due to the property tax levy expiring. And then the cost to maintain the police department, which is obviously outpacing regular property tax and sales tax revenue, and then possibly exploring more funding for parks. So we'll get into sort of the next steps, but what we would normally do is sort of get involved, is start meeting with leaders across the city, elected leaders and other stakeholders to really understand what you're up against, what your budget challenges are, and to any extent that we would do polling and other research, get a sense for what hard budget numbers are required in order to do things at different levels. Most of the time we find when we do polling that, sometimes it might be surprising, but sometimes voters actually want to support a higher tax number, a higher increase, because it means they're getting a lot more for their services or for that investment. And so having a sort of suite of services or of offers that we can provide to voters can oftentimes be very beneficial to see what the community is prioritizing and what they want to invest in. Ryan, you want to talk about the Duval electorate?
Yeah. So we did a deep dive on, talking about a ballot initiative potentially. We wanted to put together a sort of overview of who the voters are, who would be the people deciding on the initiative. And this is based on 3 different, I guess, theoretical elections, one like an April special election, the second being an August primary election, and the third being a November general election. These numbers are based on an even year, so potentially 2026. We would be expecting around 1,500 or so people to vote in this theoretical April election, closer to 3,000 in a primary, and then upwards of 4,000 in a general election. And you can see at the bottom, it's about 5,600 registered voters, but that doesn't mean everyone is going to vote. So those are the different percentages of expected turnout. Obviously, the general is the highest, which is around 67%, and the others are sort of lower than that. And this is a lot of numbers as far as the demographic audience breakdown for each of those elections. The main takeaways that, as I was putting this together, that really stood out was just as you get from a special to a primary to a general, the audience really shifts younger, and younger being closer to like 35 to 49. That share expands a lot. So you're just getting less seniors who make up a larger percentage of it. But as far as like gender, female and male, it's pretty much 50-50. It seemed like in the primary there was a stronger female turnout, and then politically it's like 70% Democrat and 22-ish% Republican and 8% independent for each of those elections, even accounting for the age difference.
Any questions on the demographics before we move along?
Not seeing any in the room, so I think you're good.
Christian, you want to take this?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, as far as like the work plan and thinking through, there's obviously there's statutory referral dates of 120 days before an election to place a measure on a ballot. And so kind of working backwards, but, starting where you are now is with a generous amount of time really to sort of think through, to Erin's earlier point about, stakeholder engagement, listening sessions, what kind of work you would like to do as a council, and how to best go about soliciting public input and advice on either components of the levy that you're thinking of, components of the levy that maybe others have brought forward, size and scope, et cetera. And then, how to best shape it and make sure you meet with public approval, whether that's formal polling, whether that's informal polling. And there's a number of ways to sort of get that feedback. Having some kind of just go and no-go decision really depends, like this coming winter. Obviously, if a decision was made to go for a special election ballot like April, you would need to make that decision much earlier in terms of a referral window and around the first of the year. Whereas a November 26 ballot, you have until about a year from now to make that final decision. So there is obviously some variation there of, a 6 to 8 month window in terms of your, making a referral date. Sometimes with a brand new levy, you may try it on a special election. If it doesn't work, that gives you time then to reformulate and put it back out later. But ideally, again, you want to have something that you think is going to do well and put it out once and call it good. But again, for the timeline for the next several months is really about, putting yourself in the right position to make the smartest choice. And there's other benchmarks along the way that we can talk more about.
I'll just add also, obviously what's happening nationally can really help inform when times are better in addition to the electorate and what's happening locally. And so I think that polling will be really helpful to understand sort of how voters are feeling, both in terms of their own personal finances and any strains that they're feeling in their household. But, because the sort of national environment is changing pretty rapidly, it's harder to get a clearer sense of, the economy is going to be doing X, Y, or Z by this time next year. And so that's a little bit of a wild card that, we'll do our smartest polling to make sense against.
Yeah. Erin, do you want to chat through this one? Oop, maybe Erin didn't hear me.
Nope, sorry, I got it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, as we mentioned, what we would recommend is getting started soon and just reaching out with stakeholders, setting up interviews. We can put together a recommended list of participants that we would like to meet with and suggested questions that anyone is welcome to review and add to and help us refine. And then just go through the process of really understanding what folks, both department heads, council members, and neighbors, community leaders are experiencing. It really does help inform form, you know, we all have our own sort of a siloed perspective of what voters are feeling, but it helps to have a sort of community-wide perspective. It also helps get some early buy-in and investment to helping put together a levy and see its success once it's on the ballot. Once we pulled that together, that can also be a really important stage to help us figure out what types of language and what types of services or resources that we want to test on a poll. So once we have gone through that process and we have a sort of summary of those conversations and interviews, we would put with a poll firm a research firm that we work together, put a poll together that, you know, anyone could review and help to refine, and then just put it in the field and see what comes back. And, you know, oftentimes we're surprised to learn that certain things really popped with voters, other things nobody's interested in, or that there are ways that we can describe things that are connecting with voters in ways that we might not have foreseen. Once we have that information, we use all of the data, all of the conversations and the interviews that we've had, and looking at the electorate and also considering the budgets of each electorate, because they do fluctuate a little bit, having more voters to communicate with. And, you know, then we work together to decide what ballot it makes the most sense to put this measure on and start building towards it. So engaging stakeholders, identifying voters, and laying the groundwork for the volunteer sort of network that will set any levy up for success.
Aaron, can I ask just a clarifying question on something you said, and if other council members have questions as well? I think around the polling, I'm just interested in sort of scoping that a little bit, because I think you alluded there's a lot of levies kind of going on at the county level. There is national stress around pricing, and I've sort of heard this from other city leaders struggling the same thing, whether it's a county level, whether it is the federal budget issues. We do have a set of issues that we, you know, think about, but how we approach those, you know, when you're talking about expanding services, and I'll just, as an example, like developing a park versus taking away services, there's a different response from the community. Do we sort of make some assumptions and then you go out and validate those assumptions? That's where I was kind of trying to get a little clarity on the polling, or is it to get a pulse and a sense of the community generally around willingness to, you know, to pay? Because there's different ways you could approach this in terms of how important these issues are to the community versus price stressors, other things that are more generic but would impact the outcome. Sorry, that was a little wordy question, but I was trying to get some clarity around the type of polling you were talking about.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just say really quickly, I think that is really smart thinking. And I think it's sort of a combination of all of the above. For example, right now we're working with the King County Library System, who is likely going to put a levy on the ballot that would be on, you know, will possibly be on, for example, an August ballot next year. And so that's certainly a consideration that we would make. And, you know, we're abreast of other levies that other jurisdictions are considering, and would definitely provide that as folks are deciding which ballot to put this levy on. You know, I think that we've seen oftentimes, if you sort of threaten voters that a service will go away if you don't vote for this, that they respond pretty negatively to something like that. And so the polling really does help demonstrate sort of the ways that you can talk to voters about it. And oftentimes adding services, adding a park, adding additional hours, for example, is one way to generate interest and enthusiasm for a levy. But I think, you know, it's sort of an all of the above. Like we can't expect the poll to solve all of our problems and answer all of the questions, but it's a really important guide that helps point us in the right direction, you know, based on all of those questions. Sorry, Christian, if you had more to add.
No. I think that's right. And I think one way of thinking about it is like, if you put yourself in the shoes of taxpayers or consumers, as we all are, right? Like, you don't want to pay more for the same thing. You get a little bit resentful or start thinking about what are the externalities or what's going on. And so levies that are most successful, you know, can be a little counterintuitive, but, you know, there needs to be something new or different, right? It's like, okay, like I'm willing to part with more of my hard-earned money, but what am I getting for it, right? And again, and you think about school levies. Most people don't have kids in school, but they're willing to pay a little bit more because they value education and they want their grandkids, or they want their neighbors' kids or their nieces and nephews to get a good education. So there's a selfless aspect to it. But there is sort of a, like, because people weigh the options. So in terms of how we structure a poll around that, you can say like, hey, here's the baseline, and we're asking for this levy because one, costs have gone up, and so we need to adjust to make sense of that. And here's what more we can do. And I think, like, typically then, you when you're constructing a poll, you think about, well, what are the 3 or 4 things that we might want to add in, right? Is it building out a local park to provide more recreation opportunities for Duval families? Is it providing some additional, public safety services or wraparound services? Is it to, and fill in the blank, right? You can, some cities, smaller cities have looked at like buying a new vehicle, putting in some better lighting, hiring a behavioral health specialist. I mean, there's some low cost, high impact things that also can make a levy more, exciting may be an overstatement, but make it resonate a little bit more with voters, especially when there's financial uncertainty, as I think most people would agree there is right now in terms of the broader economic picture.
I think Councilmember Naplet had a question as well.
Yeah, just kind of a question, maybe more of a comment. I saw this referenced as a renewal. And one thing, just when we talked to the voters, it was on their gauge public opinion on renewal. So I think maybe it's considering this is the renewal of the levy that's expiring. But I want to point out a difference. What was the difference last time is we were gaining a resource officer at the high school, and it was for a capital investment in a large park. It was primarily capital. And so my concern is that, since you were saying that, taking this negative and saying, we're going to take things away from you if you don't vote for this, that threat is not well received. But what I see has happened is our city has expanded our staffing from about 40-ish employees to 62. We've really expanded a lot of events, different things. So we have about a $2 million deficit, and that is why we need more money. And so the concern is we've already basically expanded government to provide all these things that people potentially wanted. And so now the threat is, oh, we don't have enough money for that. We'll have to take it away. So we've already expanded. We've already grown to the level that, I don't know if that makes sense to you. And so just to tread water where we're at now is why the money is needed. This is not going to provide an additional park. It's not, and my concern is this is more of an operational levy versus a capital, which is what it would be replacing potentially. And if we use all of our levy capacity, or not legal capacity, but more tolerance of the community to pass a levy on really an operational levy that is just sustaining a large expansion that we already did, that we couldn't afford potentially. I don't know. If we use all that capacity to say, hey, we need this money, we do have large projects that are capital projects that need money. We have Third Avenue Road project that the community has been promised. We have Big Rock Ballpark expansion. We bought new property. We want to build it out. If we use all of our kind of tolerance in the community to pass a levy on paying for operational costs that we've expanded our government into a $2 million deficit, we can't then come back in a year and say, oh yeah, now we need to pay to actually build the stuff. And then it will be even more. So anyway, I think we have a lot to balance. And my concern is just exactly what your point is, saying we're going to take things away if you don't pass it. is sort of where we put ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we're in a deficit.
Yeah, I hear you. And I don't mean to say that it's not possible to pass in those situations, right? Very few levies are like, it's just all new money to do new and exciting things, especially at this stage in, our government funding. And so very often levies do pass to continue existing services, and people do support it. I think that, you need to be careful with the language. Like if it's a threatening language rather than a like, you love this service, let's protect it, let's renew our investment in it, let's, like be careful about the ways that you're talking about it. But you're exactly, I think another important reason to do the stakeholder conversations is to really get a sense of like, here are the most immediate needs, but what's on the horizon and what will you need to go back to voters for, so that we do find a balance and don't sort of burn every bridge in one election. It's possible that voters, when we do the research, we do the polling, voters are like, no, I'm maxed out, I'm not going to support it. But we'll get to that process and have a clearer sense by going through these steps, and can make decisions at that point. My guess is that, like 3 of the 4 things that you want are people will support, and 2 of them are really supportive, for example, like really supported. And then it's just sort of figuring out like funding wise, how can you make it all work? Or are there things that will need to be trimmed as a result? But the good news is it's not the longest runway, but we have a runway to figure it out, to get it right, and to make sure we're setting ourselves up best for success.
City Administrator also had a comment.
Yeah, I want to be really clear to any members of the community who may be listening. We, the city council, mayor, have not decided that this is an operational levy. In fact, we've done no stakeholdering. We haven't talked to the community. This is the groundwork for what may happen. In your surveys, in your stakeholder feedback sessions, you may find out that there isn't an appetite for operational levies. That's part of your analysis. You may find out there's only an appetite for capital. So I don't want anyone to get ahead of the really important process of what the levy may include. You're not there yet.
Right. I think, oh, sorry, there's another comment in the room.
Oh, just,
Councilmember Henry.
yeah, unless you want to respond anymore. I have one question about the polling. It's so interesting to me, and there's so many complexities in people's opinions. So I guess answer this to whatever depth is appropriate for this point in time, because I realize we're early. How do you walk the line in a poll to make sure that you capture, yes, people may want, I'm just using a park as an example, even though that's not, may not be what we're talking about. But if people want this new thing or something else, but I don't want to pay extra. How do you work it in polls where you make sure to capture people's desires, but also align it with, if they're willing to pay additional funds towards that?
So typically the way these are structured, like a survey is structured, is you start with some generic questions about, like what issues are important or, to you and your family, what issues should your city council be paying attention to, see how those, align. And then you start with sort of a straw discussion around a ballot measure. And again, this is usually informed by the early, as Aaron was sort of, talking about the timeline, like, get stakeholder and public input through your normal channels, and talk internally, of course, about the challenges, priorities, kind of the needs you have, and then come up with a couple different ideas, right? And then you sort of bounce those ideas off people without a lot of information, and you get a pretty good read then about the tolerance. And again, in a publicly funded or survey, you're not asking would you vote yes or no. You're talking about generic levels of support for those types of services. And that gives you a pretty decent idea of kind of where people are. And then you can break it down into the components, right? And see how popular or unpopular some of those individual components are. A set of capital investments, a set of operational expenditures, et cetera. And again, rooted in, confined by reality, right? Like what you're hearing from people, what you think the needs are, what the unmet needs are, et cetera. And I think then you ask again towards the end, right? It's like, okay, well, now that you've heard some of this stuff, would you be more or less willing to consider, a levy investment of some kind? And you get a pretty good, I think, pretty good feedback from that. Where we've seen things go, not so successfully in the past is when there's maybe a little irrational exuberance about like, oh, well, hey, people seem to really like this stuff. Let's do it all. And then you kind of overwhelm people and the price tag goes up a little too high, or too many people see things in there that they don't really like, or it becomes too much of a Christmas tree, right, where you're just sort of like doing a little bit too much. And I think that's where you run the risk of kind of alienating some folks. Or going back to the loss of services discussion, if it is real that you're going to lose, and again, we'll use kind of the library district as an example, because a lot of those are self-sustaining. And so some of the concerns that the council member raised about, like general growth or sort of offsetting of different budget priorities, aren't quite the same, right, within a junior taxing district. But it's like, hey, if we don't have this levy, we're going to cut hours. Like, that's a legitimate and real thing, and that's an honest conversation to have. But if you stop there, it's like, well, are you threatening me? Like, what's happening here, right? So it's really important to have the, like, not only is this going to protect hours from cuts and service cuts, but we are also then looking at, modernizing, some facilities, or doing some, expanding ebook availability in the face of rising costs and stuff like that, right? So you think about, like, you're having an honest conversation about what's at risk, but you're also having a conversation about, like, hey, and hopefully you'll like this other stuff we're going to do too. And that way it's a little bit more of a balance. But I think in a small community like yours, sort of one final thought on this is, I think being like having a good transparent conversation, especially at the outset, is super important, right? Because you do have the benefit of a smaller community where people feel very invested and very bought in to what all of you are doing in terms of leadership, but also the outcomes they want to see. And I think people should be open to having those types of discussions.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a question about the numbers. I mean, we're talking about a very small set of registered voters. I mean, your numbers were just under 5,700 people, and I imagine that if, in terms of the ability to forecast results based on, a sample size or polling data, I presume you need a reasonably large sample. And so with polling, I mean, if you're at a 10%, I don't know what the numbers are, but if you're at a 10% response rate, right, you're at 570 people. Is that enough? If you're a 1% response rate, you're talking about 57 people. I can't imagine that's enough to forecast. And so where do the numbers line up for that?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Aaron. Sorry.
I was going to say that's a great flag, and we did check with the polling firm that we work with on this because they were also concerned with that. I can't remember what the poll size is. I'll look back to the proposal while we're sort of continuing through the conversation, but that was based on their recommendations for Duval specifically.
Yeah, I think, there's whether you're doing a survey in Duval or across the United States, like, shockingly, and I'm not a statistician, so I don't fully understand how these numbers work, but, somewhere between 400 and 600 people, it tends to be statistically significant. But yeah, I think obviously we could tailor that and come back with some recommendations.
Question for, sorry, Councilmember Supple.
Yeah, the levy needs, 60% of the voters to vote yes?
Bonds do, not levies.
What was the levy need? 50%?
It's 50, yeah, it's a simple majority. Yeah.
Simple majority, okay. So generally, is it easier to get a small population to vote? Yes, like in the primary versus the general when you have a larger population? Or is there any statistical analysis or significance to the voting population?
Yeah, and it does get a little bit of the, you can, when you're doing a survey, you kind of want to understand which electorate you're aiming for to get the right balance in a survey. If you look at, Ryan's initial sort of, analysis here. I think the primary elections tend to have that kind of Goldilocks effect of like, not too small, not too big, right in the middle. But sometimes it's helpful to have higher turnout and in a general election, or just based on the timing of when it's appropriate to go forward. Give the most people the opportunity to weigh in. Has a lot of advantages too. So I think there's no the electorate in August and November is more predictable, right, than a special election, because special elections have a lot of variation of their school districts out, because that's going to pull more parents, of course. Is there nothing? And that's going to cause turnout to drop a little bit because people aren't understand why there's a ballot coming. It's also a little more expensive for municipality to buy space on a special election, because I think there's a cost differential that the municipality has to bear, or the taxing district has to bear, in order to help produce ballots for specials. So yeah, there's a variety of factors, but but you can be successful in any format.
So I just didn't know if it pertained to the slides they already presented, or if you wanted to wait so they moved. And then
Yeah, I think
ask your
there's a
question, either one.
If there's more slides, I'll wait.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I'll let you.
there's only a couple more, and they're kind of in the around campaign planning, which obviously is not to be either prejudged or really discussed in detail here. But Ryan, I know you got a couple there towards the end. I'll just say, the handoff, all this leads up to a referral timeline of again, assuming there's a decision to move forward, when pick that date, lock in on that, go through the hearing process. And then at that point it becomes there's a firewall that's erected, and the activities around the levy move externally, and there's there's the formal side of the voter guide statement, and some of the other again sort of activities that do occur as a bridge between the official action of referral to the ballot, and the ballot and the campaign itself. And then there's the sort of activation and continuation of what started as community conversations, continue as community conversations, but obviously using volunteer capacity and whatever coalition comes around it. But just happy to discuss that more, but just in the context of just getting the process started here tonight, and not wanting to cross boundaries into political conversations. There's a method to the madness, and there's a way to sort of approach it, but there are also some guidelines and some ethics rules that we want to be aware of and follow. And I think, is that the end of the slides there? Yes. All right.
So how important is a social media campaign in getting a levy passed?
Ryan, you want to talk about social media?
Yeah, I would say very little. Given I can stop sharing too. Given that in Washington, we're not allowed to, from a campaign standpoint, advertise on social media like Facebook or Instagram. It's just not allowed for us. It takes a very organic type of social media that we would have to start on the campaign side and try to build the audience just organically. And it's very difficult, especially on a really, really short timeline, on a not super well-known initiative like a local ballot initiative. I don't think it would be very impactful from a campaign standpoint. Now, what the city, if the city of Duval has social media and individual council members, if you guys are promoting it from the official side, just educating voters and not necessarily telling them how to vote, but just letting them know that this is an initiative that exists and what it would do, that would be allowed. And for existing, like, if any of you have existing pages that get a good reach within Duval, I think that would be a worthwhile, use of social media. And we can talk about that, in the future.
Yeah, and there's also, other organizations or other stakeholders.
Right.
So I am trying to understand about, what voters are receptive and expecting when we ask for more money. And one of the things as a voter myself, if, especially if it's an ask that would relate to operational, costs, that I would want to see that there was a very clear effort to find cost savings and look at ways to, whether or not you could bring expenses down, change the trajectory going forward to lower the slope of that expense increase that we're trying to fill the hole for. How beneficial is it for the city to have something that shows we legitimately did the work in that area? So, I mean, I'm just kind of in the top of my mind, have we looked over our spending? We've added more staff. Have we looked at professional services to try to bring money down? We've purchased a new financial and really beyond that, kind of an enterprise system that, was supposed to bring efficiencies and reduce our reliance on, staff. Have we fully implemented that to its maximum ability? And can we tell that story and not just do it to tell the story to convince people that we've done it, but legitimately do it, right? How important is that when you tell the story of wanting and needing more money from the community? Like, how much does the community want to hear that and actually see evidence that your government attempted that before asking for more money?
Yeah, I think it's it's never a bad thing, obviously, right? To say, hey, look, we are, we are tightening our belts. We're doing what we need to do to respond to the economic situation at large, and and here's something that we're asking for. I think what we've seen that's in some ways more important is the accountability framework of the levy. If you look at the a lot of if you see your ballot for different countywide measures, noting that there's independent audits or annual audits, independent oversight, setting up a levy oversight committee. A lot of cities do that. And again, it's a way to also keep stakeholders engaged and provide some, some tracking and some input. So to ensure accountability, that the dollars that we say are going to be earmarked for school resource officer or for park improvements or for whatever are actually going to those places. So I think, just as the internal discussion in the lead up is important, how, putting together an accountability framework is also important, and voters do appreciate that. The second thing, of course, is assuming it's a property tax levy that's under discussion, exemptions for low-income senior households and others that are provided, and making sure people are aware of that too, that they can have relief if they need it, or if they qualify for it. So those are two things I think that are pretty important to bake in. But get to your fundamental point about making sure people feel good and that they know their dollars are being well used.
Totally follow up. Yeah. So you mentioned about the exemptions for low income senior. So I'm not exactly sure. For example, our prior levy, did that allow for those exemptions? Because I feel like it might have been, was it considered an excess levy? You know what I mean? Like certain types of levies can have that exemption and others don't really. Do you see what I mean?
State law, but I think it depends on when it was phased in, right? You have to check with your law department on that. I would recommend that any levy you put forward include the appropriate exemptions, make sure people know that those are available. But yeah, in terms of what was included in the last one, or whether an existing levy was grandfathered into a recent exemption, I don't know that.
I'm sure that we can get that type, if that's.
Yeah, I mean, once we kind of walk through what it is, I mean, so we haven't, as this council, this body hasn't named it, right? So you haven't done stakeholdering, you haven't done polling. So once you figure out if you wanted to do a property tax levy, and that's still an open question, then you would look at what kind of exemptions you could do. But I think you're probably a bit ahead of that, but I think that would be naturally a question you would want as a council to have answered.
Yeah.
I don't have an opportunity to ask follow-up questions. So I appreciate all the information you shared this evening. As you said, it's sort of a before the horse. There's a fair amount of, I think, deliberation. We've had some strong discussions in terms of what was important, but really haven't gotten into the details. Kind of what I heard there is, there's a level of, there's some I was going to say there's an emotional component as well, sort of the fiscal, what resonates with voters, how things are framed in terms of language, the level of engagement with the community, sort of seeding the ground before you actually go out to the voters and making sure there's sufficient time for that. But a lot of it, I think, sounds like from these initial discussions is the council deliberating amongst itself to really get crystal clear on priorities, those trade-offs, pros and cons, and then sort of give you or revisit with you in terms of to then get levels of input, because this seems very much an iterative process. That's the one thing I saw some big milestones in terms of when we would post the levy. I think you touched on 6 months or 7 months, but could you touch a little bit on the cadence or the process if we deliberate? And again, no decisions have been made, but we've identified some priorities that we want to potentially pursue with the community. Then we reach back, kind of what that would look like a little bit in terms of a timeline, in terms of steps. And again, not getting too much in the weeds, but I'm trying to get a little more granularity.
Yeah, sure. And let's use next August as an example, just because it's a nice round number a year from now. But if the decision was made, okay, let's start a process that would give us sort of a go or no go decision for an August ballot timeline. I think counting back, you need to make a final decision on referral by around sometime in April, early May at the very latest. So you can think about okay, so that then gives us then the spring to really kind of workshop the package into the final shape we want it to be, and again, have the public hearings and do the outreach to make sure it's copacetic with what people expect or want. There's so that kind of takes us back then to February, January timeframe in terms of the sausage making around the policy. And then if you then back up then the next step, it's gets us into the kind of September through early December when things shut down for the holidays to really go back to what Aaron described a little while ago, which is kind of building out the interviews and stakeholder process, for lack of a better term, who would be important to meet with, informally or formally, either us sort of helping you in terms of asking questions and sort of gathering information, or formally through council process and input. And then you looking internally, both in terms of the budget needs of the city, but also weighing some of the different elements that could be included, and what some of the trade-offs are there. So, these things work simultaneously, right? The internal process of narrowing or identifying needs or narrowing options, the external process of getting input about what people want or what gaps they see, asking some open-ended questions about some of those potential services or potential elements of a measure. And then, again, then moving forward again. So we spend a few months kind of moving there, do that survey work or the public opinion research either right at the end of this year or probably early next year. And then that helps to narrow things down and get into that refinement period. But does that make sense from sort of a forward, backward?
It kind of ties into our mid-biennium process as we start to think about budget looking forward. And that's kind of where I was trying to get like the work back in terms of when we kind of need to start to coalesce around some directional guidance. So, thank you. Questions from council? Councilmember McHenry?
Not really a question. I just want to say this was really helpful for me. I was starting to feel concerned about timelines and I would never want to rush something like this. It's so important to get that feedback from the community and see where everybody's at. So this was really helpful tonight.
Yeah, appreciate it, Echo. Appreciate you've given us quite a bit to think about in terms of next steps. So appreciate making yourselves available this evening to give some.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure, and we're really excited to be on the team, and looking forward to next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks all.
So there being no further discussion items this evening, the council planning calendar is available online. We can adjourn.
Internal? Is there any room for internal conversation about this?
I don't know how that works because we don't have a
Yeah,
discussion.
if it relates to the content of the meeting, or the presentation, it would fit onto like in the agenda. So yes.
Yeah.
I guess my question then I can frame it first is more about process and actors within the process as opposed to the content of the presentation. Is that fair? So I guess what I'm wondering is I do think that it's important to be transparent, right, with the residents of Duval, and I think that's the purpose of this, right? Is not just to make sure that we get a yes vote, but it's to communicate what's happening and to identify what the priorities are and figure out how to execute those properly. And ideally win as much consensus as we can in the process. And so, in so doing, we're going to potentially engage a firm that does this professionally. I know that as a body, and I know that as a city, we've done similar work in the past. We've run our own polls, we've run community development, we've tried to gain feedback. And I guess I know there's going to be a cost to working with the consultants. And I imagine you probably did an RFP and figured out who the best people to work with are. So assuming that they're the ones, I'm curious what the qualitative difference would be in result and an effort by hiring them versus if we tried to do this ourselves.
So one of the examples you raised was around community development and the engagement that happened related like to the comp plan, for instance. That was extraordinarily expensive and the consultant did it. So if you're thinking about, so if polling is a priority and you're thinking about statistically valid polling or survey work, the city for something big where you want to capture a big audience would tend to use a consultant for that because the city doesn't have any expertise on building statistically valid polling. So the comp plan is a good example. The city didn't do that on our own. Like Laura and I didn't sit together and create a survey and mail it out. That was done by a consultant. We have done small engagements that, using Microsoft Forms, kind of test on what I would say low stakes issues. So for instance, I did all of the internal work on getting community feedback that went into the biennial art plan. So what kind of things you want to see in the community? So we did an online survey. We did work in City Hall, inviting people in to do a dot exercise. So we can do some of that, but it just kind of depends on what council wants and how accurate, I guess you would want it to be, because if it's something like polling, that you want to get an accurate result, you know, we would want someone professional to do it, and the city internally doesn't have to do so.
Are there also and just a follow-up question on this, because my understanding is there some legal boundaries as well in terms of there's what's important in terms of the community, which I think is a more neutral conversation, to the moving to the point where we move something onto the ballot, and then there's some walls that need to be, where city staff can't be used. So there's a consultant is required at some point in the process, or a third party.
Yeah, I mean, the city, so the early part, right? So before council decides to put something on a ballot, so the pre-stage, is like what I would call it. You know, the city could host public events and not require a consultant to do that. You know, I know how to convene people, and we can do any number of convenings and stakeholder interviews. And, you know, I have, for the most part in 2025, prioritized revenue options and a couple other things on my work plan. So I kind of planned for having capacity this fall to do some of that work. So that part of it we can do. Once a decision has made to go into a campaign and a ballot initiative, the ability for city staff to write the content, do any of that during work hours ceases to exist. So we would all have to volunteer our time to work as members of a campaign off hours, and there are really strict rules around that.
But yet we can pay others to do that for us. See, it's interesting. We can pay consultants to do that. We just can't do it ourselves.
You can't campaign for yourself.
Okay, it's interesting.
I just wanted to, there was one slide at the end and we didn't go over it, but it was saying something about, like working with like the campaign or the, you know, the Yes Pro committee. Our consultant that's paid for by taxpayer dollars can't work with the pro committee, right?
They can do educational information, but they can't, they can't campaign for yes or no.
Would they be available if there was a no campaign or a yes campaign to interact with? Do you see what I mean? Because otherwise, if we authorize, I feel a little bit uncomfortable of how exactly that would work. If our consultant that's paid for by the taxpayer is only working with a pro committee for
That's not at all.
educational purposes.
Yeah, that,
Do you see what?
yeah, that's not how it works or what I said. So the consultant would help craft the ballot measure, but they do not write the information for the pro campaign. They don't write the information for the no campaign. Their only job is to do, if you want them to do some stakeholdering, to do polling and then help you get on the ballot. Everything then has to turn to a campaign that is not run by the consultant. That they would help you decide, okay, do you need volunteers? How you would go about it, but then they walk away from it too. Their only job is to help you write the ballot initiative. After that, it becomes a campaign of volunteers either on the pro or con.
And that's why they mentioned the social media. They can't manage
They
a
can't
site.
manage
They
it.
can basically create the language and then give us the tools that you could create a grassroots or whatever, and then it would have to be run organically.
So we can't pay them to do anything that we wouldn't be able to do ourselves.
Correct.
So they have no special privileges separate, like any law that applies to us of what we're allowed to do in our elected official capacity or staff level capacity. They also have the exact same restrictions because we're paying them. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So for instance, most of the time you would have a PAC created to do the work, probably not in a city as small as Duval, but sometimes a PAC will get created for a pro campaign or a PAC will get created for a no campaign. That's not the work of the consultant. It cannot be the work of the staff either.
Yeah, thank you.
So I make sure we're good. Want to adjourn the special committee of the whole at 6:37 p.m.